Turns out men have struck again. If you remember a few weeks ago, we discussed how men from the nation of no fixed abode, very violent country that one, have been committing lots of crimes across Europe, and they're all men of a particular demographic that we cannot notice. Well, today we're going to be going through 3 new and updated case studies about how these indiscriminate men seem to have, for no apparent reason, committed Islamic terror attacks. Shock. But before we do that, Islander merch is on the website. I believe today is the last day that you can get the Islander merch from the first issue. Maybe because there's another issue on the horizon. Who knows? Ooh. But Rory designed all this merch, and this t-shirt in particular is a very good-looking one. He's put a lot of effort into it. So
you'll love this t-shirt. It's an amazing t-shirt.
I love sort of classic 8-bit Orcs and Elves games, so it's. I don't wear graphic tees, but if you are inclined to wear graphic tees, remember, this is like the only way to support us other than donating on the website or subscribing to the website, which you should also do. So please consider it, and this will be limited edition, so you can boast to all your friends if you have those. Don't know why you'd want them. Anyway, on to an update. What's happening in Germany? Why was everyone voting AfD? Could it have been that the 15% migrant population are committing 41% of the crimes? What crimes, you ask? How about a terror attack? So, yesterday was the anniversary of the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. If you don't know what that is, basically a Palestinian terror group called Black September went and killed 12 people. I think there's about 5 or 6 members of the Israeli Olympic team and a bunch of other hostages. And then then there were 7 of those that died as well. There was a shootout. None of the hostages got rescued. One of the police officers died. This caused the establishment of the GSG-9 German police service. It was a massive event. I think it was commemorated at the 2020 Olympics with a minute of silence. On this anniversary, a bloke turned up outside the Israel Foreign Ministry and the Munich consulate and decided to discharge a World War II rifle 30 or 40 times. Problem is, there was basically no one inside the building, so he wasn't the brightest terrorist of the bunch.
A bit useless. When Josh told me that this had happened, I asked him, oh, was this one of those new Germans? And he said, well, it was either them or one of the old Germans.
He used old German weaponry, but he's not even German. As DW tell us, right, this is an Austrian man. An Austrian man.
He's back.
Why would Austrian men do this? Police say, a few hours after the incident, they shot him, by the way, an 18-year-old Austrian, an 18-year-old with Austrian citizenship, but they didn't comment on potential motives. Currently, and this is according to DW, and this is a quote from the Munich Police and Public Prosecution's Office in a joint statement. Currently, we're working on the assumption that it's an attempted terrorist attack, also in connection with the Consulate General of Israel, although the focal point of the running investigations is the motivation of the suspect. Now, what wasn't mentioned in here about the Austrian man, as revealed by Bild, Lord Almighty, I don't know what button to press with that. But anyway, you can see that in the description. The attacker's name is Emrah I, so they've condensed that down. And he does...
Emrah.
Emrah. E-M-R-A-H-I.
Emrah.
Typical German name, right? According to Bild, and Bild, bear in mind, was the outlet that first published the photos and information that the stabber at the Solingen Diversity Festival was a Syrian national, and they got that right, so they're pretty authoritative out there. According to Bild, the man was born in Austria. He has an Austrian passport, so we know that makes him Austrian. Ignore the fact he has Bosnian roots. Ignore the fact that he's a second-generation immigrant.
This is all just exactly the same as the Welsh man from Southport.
Yep, yes. Quite. Well, there's a slight difference, because obviously we don't know the motivation of the Welsh man from Southport, but I think we can guess here, because the thing that was left out, in 2023, he was reported on suspicion of membership of a terrorist organisation because the Austrian authorities found ISIS propaganda on his phone. Conveniently left out of the prior articles. I looked at a bunch of other articles, by the way, to present to you that were in English, because this one's in German. You can translate it, but I thought it'd be easier. Wasn't mentioned in Reuters, wasn't mentioned by the BBC, wasn't mentioned by DW. I wonder why they conspicuously left that motivation out. I'm sure it's just men.
I wonder why the AfD are rising.
Yeah, I wonder why the promise of mass deportations is appealing to so many young Germans. I mean, the point being, totally avoidable accident. Incident, not accident. Don't let foreign criminals into your country. Would be a fantastic idea. Same thing's happening in the UK. Really glad this is not an isolated incident. We had this come out yesterday. So the Home Office were meant to be having an inquest about this aspirational Marine being stabbed to death by an Afghan. And they now don't have to do the inquest because the coroner, and this is Rachel Griffin, senior coroner for Dorset, ruled Wednesday, on the 5th of September, there was no need for a full inquest into this murder because she said there was a system of checks in place when this chap, Lawangin Abdulrahim Aziz, I can't pronounce this name.
Abdul Rahimzai.
Abdul Rahimzai, that's it, thank you. There was apparently a whole system of checks in place when he entered the country to check his identity and undertake an age assessment, so it's not a systemic failure that he slipped through the net. We're going to go through the details of this case, because I happen to think this hasn't been labelled a systemic failure and hasn't been investigated, because it looks so bad for the authorities that let him through the net that the entire immigration and asylum system would fall apart if they admitted fault here. But she said, although there was an emerging pattern of violent behaviour and a risk to others of harm at the time of the incident, that the illegal immigrant had used a knife in an act of violence, apparently he hadn't made any threats to kill anyone since arriving in the UK in December 2019. She said, it's too speculative and remote to state that there was a causal link between these missed opportunities to detect him and Tommy's death, the chap who was killed. Let me see what you think. So the details of the case are, Tom Roberts, 21, stabbed to death by this chap, the Afghan guy, who had previously shot 2 migrants with a Kalashnikov in Serbia while travelling to the UK. Might have been able to detect that.
So while he was escaping persecution, I assume.
Persecution, sure. Not one of the interpreters. Why would he be fleeing from the Taliban? Why would he know how to use a Kalashnikov? Is it possible he was a militant?
We can never know. We can never know these things.
It's not that they admitted that they were using the asylum thing to, literally infiltrate us.
Oh, yeah. Well, so this chap, Abdul Rahim Azi, arrived in the UK on December the 26th, 2019, hidden in a vehicle, back of a lorry, on a ferry from Cherbourg, and told the Border Force officials he was 14. At the time, no assessment was carried out.
Oh, thank God, you're illegally entering the country, but you're 14. Come right in.
And we're not going to check it at all. No documents, we're just going to take your word for it, right? His fingerprints were taken a few weeks later and revealed he had links with Norway and Italy, so he'd passed through other safe countries, noted war zones, Norway and Italy. The fingerprints were then sent to both countries, but with no request for further information, for some reason. So they just sent the documents and didn't request follow-up. If this had been done, it would have revealed that his age was in question, because he's actually 19. Yeah. So, full-grown adult posing as a child. On January 29th, 2020, his foster carer reported that a dentist said Abdul Rahimazi was older than he had indicated, and while it was felt an age assessment was needed, it wasn't done because the authorities felt a mental health assessment was needed first. They needed to check if he would be upset by being asked his age. We are not a serious country. He was placed in a secondary school in Bournemouth, Dorset. So just stuck in a school without the need for an age check, even though lots of people were questioning his age, including his own foster family.
This is literally a George Alexopoulos cartoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
For context, there's one where, there's a school and they're in the class and one of the girls gets stabbed and then it's a full-grown Afghan man with a big beard and the teacher says, don't worry, it's just his culture.
Well, funny you say that. He was expelled for carrying a knife and then immediately enrolled in another school nearby. Why is he in the country? You could have just sent him home. You could have checked his age and deported him, but no. Then from December the 21st, 2020, and throughout 2021, there were several incidents and concerns raised around Abdul Rahim Azi carrying knives, including allegedly chasing another pupil at his school with a knife, which he denied. In May 2021, he hurt another student at the school, causing an injury. In July that year, he tried to headbutt his foster carer, who managed to move out the way. Oh, that's all right then, is it? In September, when he had been placed somewhere else, he was accused of assaulting another child. So just a repeat criminal offender who lies about his age.
Also, let's stop for a moment and consider what we're hearing here. Is a 19-year-old, presumably as time goes on, he's getting to 20, 21 years old. Here he is.
It's gone.
Yes. He comes to this country, lies about his age, and then they put him in a school immediately, and he, as a full-grown adult, who should at the very least, be interested in doing other things than hanging around a school that he's too old for, decides to hang around a school, bring knives and chase other kids around. And how is it not humiliating for him to consider that that's what he's having to go through to try to stay in this country? So there's no dignity, there's no shame in this person, not that I would expect it of someone like him. And then he goes around terrorizing school children, and this is just... normal.
It's part and parcel. as
This,
City would say.
this is something that he presumably is fine with. Obviously, I'm not surprised that he was going around terrorizing children, but the entire situation is ridiculous.
It's
If
ridiculous.
I had to break into a country and do something like this, I don't know if I could look myself in the mirror.
It's only ridiculous because he knows that he's going to be allowed to get away with it. Because the system somehow operates on the presumption that everyone is just telling the truth and that everyone is going to be free, equal, and peaceful as soon as they make contact with British soil. So he can, one, possibly be lying, and two, he therefore knows that he can do anything, such as acting like the exact barbarian he was back in his homeland and in various countries along the way, and not get kicked out of the country.
Yeah.
Because if we had, I don't know, gone to Japan and claimed to be asylum seekers from our government, and then claimed to be 12, and then into the Japanese school, and started chasing people around with the machetes, as is a British pastime these days, we'd expect to be sent home. But no.
I'd expect a bit more of a brutal beating than being sent home for doing something like that.
It really is, though, the trail of events that led there that I just find so inconceivable as well. That, you know, obviously it's all come to tragedy for, you know, this victim involved, you know, here in Britain. But the risk put on all these citizens in all these other European countries as well. Like, you know, it could have been some random Swede. It could have been a Norwegian, right? Their governments are just as complicit in this as ours, because all of them on a European scale are working with such duplicity, such, you know, to all these people that they're putting at risk in their own countries. It's monstrous.
They fundamentally believe that it's just a product of education and economics, that savages like this are insane, murderous liars. And it's like, no, some people are fundamentally morally bankrupt.
And the whole way through, he must be thinking to himself, I can't believe I've got away with all of this. Obviously, you know, it was good for him that he was able to get away with it all for so long, but he was laughing at us, and rightfully bloody so the whole time. I mean, why?
I wouldn't say rightfully so, but
rightfully so at the systems that allowed it to happen, because they are a bloody joke.
yes. So there's some more details here that they might have been able to catch him on before he decided to murder this poor young chap, who's actually a massive credit to our country, and this guy is a net drain on culture, resources, and morality. In January 2022, the authorities held a meeting confirming an age assessment would be carried out, because Abdul Rah Himazi had been, quote, bringing females back to his placement and was refusing to attend school or engage in education.
Oh, okay.
So you might think an age assessment might be needed there. You might think a few eyebrows would be raised, but no, nothing happened. Still.
I'm sure the teachers didn't want to be racist.
In just a normal structure, right, in that school, like, if you'd not take away who he is, right, just a normal child, if you're in that situation, like, you'd be kicked from the school. Or you'd be, you know, excluded or something because you've not been turning up. And that didn't happen to him either.
But the problem you have, and I've spoken to people who work in schools like this, problem schools will shift students around, especially if they are non-white or immigrants, because they don't want to be seen as being racist, despite the criminal behaviour of the school pupils themselves. And what will end up happening is they'll send them from one failing school to a slightly more successful school, on the premise that the more successful environment will recondition the student, because fundamentally we're all equal. But instead, it just makes life harder for all of the better students at the more successful school, because the only thing that makes the school better is the character of the students and the staff. So then, 2 months pass by, right? From when an age assessment is needed, because he's bringing young girls back to his flat, to March. March the 10th, in the evening, 30 hours before Tom Roberts was stabbed, the police received a call about a youth carrying a machete-style knife in public. The coroner's report, the same woman that says we don't need to look into this any further, right, states that when the police attended his address to speak to the chap, the gates were locked and they could see a member of staff asleep at his desk and couldn't gain access. So they just gave up. Great. Abdul Rah Himazi went on to kill Tom Roberts, and he was jailed for 29 years for Roberts' murder in March 2022, following a trial at Salisbury Crown Court. It later emerged he was flagged as, quote, susceptible to terrorism by the Home Office's Prevent Task Group in 2021. So he was known to the authorities for over a year. Say the line, Bart.
I wish that had booze in it.
Yeah, I know. I wish I was still drinking. Abdul Rah Himazi's fingerprints were not shared with Interpol until after Roberts' death, which revealed in September 2022 he had been convicted of double homicide in Serbia. So he'd killed 2 people in Serbia. Right. On the night of the 31st of July 2018, Abdul Rahimazi walked into a shed in farmland on the edge of Don Brinky, where a group of refugees were staying, and gunned down 2 Afghan men with an AK-47. So if they would have just gone through the process of actually checking his age with his fingerprints, they would have found out he was already a murderer. If they would have done any of the age checks after he chased students around with a knife, or presumably sexually assaulted women, they would have found out he was a murderer. But no, Tom Roberts had to die because the government voluntarily chose not to do their job. And yet, Miss Griffin, the coroner, says that the inquest did not meet the criteria for Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights. Article 2 states if the state knew or ought to have known of an immediate risk to an individual's life, it must take responsible steps to deal with that risk. Of course she didn't rule it. Because if this implies that the state knew ahead of time this guy could have been a murderer and they could have done things to stop it, then the entire immigration and asylum system is culpable.
It is remarkable, isn't it, that the European Convention on Human Rights seems to protect the rights exclusively of everyone but Europeans.
Curious, that, isn't it? It's almost like the purpose of a system is what it does. So, they call everything systemic failure, but the entire point of this was to say it wasn't a systemic failure. So they spoke to his mum, the Telegraph. So this is Dolores Wallace Roberts, poor grieving woman. She said, the Home Office don't want to engage with us. They're accountable, and there is negligence here, but they just block any attempts to find out more. They're basically saying it's okay for someone to walk around with a machete in public. They're supposed to be helping the public and protecting their safety, but instead the coroner is protecting the Home Office, Dorset Police, and the BCP Council. Everything is wrong in this country, and it will continue to happen again. She's absolutely right. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I covered the Raiku unit that oversees preventing the Home Office, and they spend billions of pounds, man-hour, even pay actors to gaslight people after terror attacks. So your children will be killed and you'll be told don't look back in anger. But then when these criminals are allowed into the country, preventable measures can be taken to detect whether they're criminals ahead of time, and they can be sent back. They won't. They'll overlook it, they won't admit fault, and it will happen again. And it has happened again. This time, a woman. So this woman didn't have a driving license, ran a man down. Oghenevwari Shitu, I'm not making that up, was driving a green BMW on Nantwich Road, Wistanson, near Nantwich, Cheshire, so close to home, Harry, when her car hit Stephen Ray on the 9th of February. You can't notice whether or not the names of the perpetrators and whether or not the names of the victims are any different, because we're all equal after all. It's not like foreigners are killing the indigenous population. Shitu, 39, of Ruskin Road Crewe. Ah, Crewe woman. Clearly, Crewe woman. Not from anywhere else.
Right, I'm from Crewe.
Yeah.
All of these names and all of these place names are very, very familiar to me. Now, whenever I return home, I've noticed that all of a sudden, I've mentioned this before, all of the old folks around the local town and the town surrounding as well are no longer being escorted around by the usual care workers from, say, 2019 and beforehand. All of a sudden, it's all being replaced by men and women like Shitu.
Same in my area.
Providing Shitu service to these people, and then doing this to locals, poor Stephen Ray.
And we wonder why the abuse rates are through the roof. Reminder, the World Health Organization found recently that 2 in 3 care workers have admitted to abusing their patients.
And a UK provisional license with driving without insurance, fantastic. Brilliant.
Driving like a typical third worlder, actually.
Yeah.
She's only been jailed for 4 years and 2 months for killing this man. Why is she here? Why has she not been deported?
So only a little bit more time than if she'd sent a nasty tweet.
Don't worry, she's been banned from driving as well. I'm sure they'll
enforce that.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll abide by that rule. Why is she in the country? Why have we got to pay for her jail sentence when we were already subsidising her career? Because remember, if she was here on a care worker visa or something like that, or generally, we can make generalisations here because immigrants of this type are never net tax contributors. We've been paying since she's been here, and now we're paying to keep her here, and presumably when she's let out, probably on early release, she'll stay here and be a net drain.
And also, this poor man paid with his life for her to be here.
Yeah, quite. So at this point, immigration is obviously a threat to the indigenous populations of Europe, but they won't admit it because the government can stop all of these tragedies happening. Their policies are complicit in them happening, and so whenever you try and get transparency from it, they'll never admit fault, and this will sadly just keep continuing.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Calvin's series. Here in this episode, he had Nick Tanconi, the interim leader of UKIP, and Speaker Bob from Speaker's Corner. And if you want to see everything else that we're putting out, you can also follow us on our Twitter account where we always post links to it. Thank you very much, and goodbye.